Welcome to another episode of the Remdesivir Files, a COVID-19 chronicle. In this episode, we are exploring the patient outcomes associated with Remdesivir treatment, from understanding how patients respond to the drug to analyzing the time of recovery, reported side effects, and pharmacovigilance data. We'll dive deep into the real-world results of the treatment. Joining us today is Saakshi Sharma, a microbiology researcher.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk about such an important aspect of the treatment process. Understanding patient outcomes is essential for refining future treatment strategies.
Let's begin by discussing the patient response patterns. Based on your research, what were the general patterns observed in patient responses to remdesivir, especially in terms of improvement or deterioration after administration?
When analyzing patient response patterns to remdesivir, it's important to note that the responses varied significantly depending upon several factors, which were disease severity, comorbidities, and the timing of administration as well. From a microbiological standpoint, remdesivir works by inhibiting viral RNA polymerase, which slows down the replication of the virus. In theory, this helps prevent the virus from spreading further in the body, especially in highly susceptible tissues such as the lungs. In clinical practice, patients who received remdesivir in early disease course, particularly during the moderate phase of COVID-19, generally exhibited more favorable outcomes. These patients typically showed improvement in oxygenation level and a reduction in inflammatory markers. This suggests that the early intervention with remdesivir helped slow viral replication before the immune system's hyper-response led to widespread organ damage. On the other hand, patients who received the drug during the later stages of infection, when severe immune dysregulation and organ failure had already set in, often showed less pronounced improvement. This pattern suggests that while remdesivir can reduce viral replication, its effect is most beneficial before the virus has caused extensive damage to the body's system. Interestingly, some patients demonstrated a delayed response, meaning they initially did not show significant improvement but improved after a few additional days of treatment. This suggests that remdesivir may also have a prolonged action, possibly allowing it to impact patients at different stages of the disease, but only after the virus is sufficiently suppressed.
It's fascinating to hear how the timing really impacted the response. Moving on to the time to recovery, what can we say about the remdesivir? How impacted the time it took to patients to recover? Were there any significant findings here that aligned with the data from clinical trials?
Time to recovery was one of the key metrics used in clinical trials and real-world studies to assess the effectiveness of remdesivir. In the ACTT1 trial, for example, patients who received remdesivir had a shorter recovery time compared to those who received a placebo. Specifically, the median recovery time for the remdesivir treated patients was 10 days, whereas the placebo group took 15 days on average. This suggests that remdesivir can potentially reduce the time to recovery for moderate to severe COVID-19 patients by a significant margin. In the real-world clinical setting, the time to recovery was influenced by various factors such as the timing of drug administration or the severity of symptoms, and also the presence of underlying health conditions. Patients who were started on remdesivir within the first 7 days of symptoms onset, particularly those with moderate disease, generally recovered faster compared to those who were treated later. However, it's important to note that not all patients experienced a significant reduction in recovery time. Some severe cases, particularly those requiring mechanical ventilation, showed a longer recovery trajectory, even with the use of remdesivir. In these cases, the length of the recovery was more dependent on the extent of organ damage and the patient's ability to respond to supportive care.
That reduction in recovery time seems quite significant. Let's now turn to the issue of side effects. Were there any notable side effects reported during the use of remdesivir? How did these impact treatment decisions?
As with any pharmaceutical treatment, side effects were an important consideration when administering remdesivir. The side effects reported during its use were generally mild to moderate, and they were consistent with what we see in other antiviral drugs. The most common side effects included elevated liver enzymes, particularly AST, which is aspartate aminotransferase, and ALT, which is alanine aminotransferase, which are indicators of the liver function. This is important because hepatotoxicity can be concern. It can be a concern when using remdesivir, especially in patients with pre-existing liver conditions. However, it's crucial to emphasize that the incidence of severe liver damage or other serious adverse events was low. For most of the patients, liver enzyme elevations were transient and resolved once the drug was discontinued or after the patient's condition was stabilized. These findings highlight the importance of monitoring patients for liver function throughout the course of treatment, particularly for those with pre-existing liver conditions. There were also reports of renal issues in some patients, particularly those with underlying kidney conditions. This was a potential concern for clinicians who had to carefully assess whether the benefit of using remdesivir outweighed the risk in patients with a compromised kidney function. In these cases, the decision to use the drug was often made on a case by case basis with close monitoring of renal parameters such as serum creatinine and urine output as well. Overall, the side effect profile of remdesivir was relatively mild, but these issues still had an impact on treatment decisions. For example, if a patient developed significant liver dysfunction or, let's say, an acute kidney injury, clinicians would have considered alternative treatments or adjusted the drug's dosage depending on the severity of the adverse effect.
It's clear that side effects played a role in patient management. Now, let's focus on pharmacovigilance. What does the pharmacovigilance data show about remdesivir, particularly in terms of its safety and effectiveness in the real world?
Pharmacovigilance, which involves the monitoring of drug safety after it's been approved and used in the general population, is crucial for understanding how a drug behaves outside the controlled clinical trials. In the case of remdesivir, pharmacovigilance data has been instrumental in tracking its safety profile and effectiveness as it was used in various healthcare settings worldwide. Based on the data collected from the global health authorities, including reports from the FDA and also the WHO, the safety profile of remdesivir was found to be consistent with what was observed in clinical trials. Most of the adverse effects were mild and serious complications were rare. However, the renal and hepatic issues I mentioned earlier were among the most commonly reported, which led to increased monitoring in patients with pre-existing conditions. Pharmacovigilance data also helped highlight that in the real world, the effectiveness of remdesivir was generally in line with clinical trial outcomes, especially for patients who received the drug during their early disease progression. The drug was more likely to improve time to recovery in those with moderate disease, as clinical data had suggested. That being said, real-world data also revealed that some patients did not experience the level of benefit seen in controlled trials. This is likely due to the varied nature of COVID-19 presentations across different patient populations. For instance, patients with significant comorbidities or those with already on mechanical ventilation may not have benefited as much from remdesivir, which reinforces the need for personalized treatment decision. Importantly, pharmacovigilance data has also provided insights into how the drug could be further optimized. As more long-term data becomes available, we can better understand its safety and efficacy profile in the context of post-COVID recovery and also the use of combination therapies.
Thank you, Saakshi, for breaking down the patient outcomes related to remdesivir. The pharmacovigilance data and the insights into side effects and time to recovery really shed light on the complexities of managing a treatment like remdesivir in a clinical setting.
It was a pleasure to share these insights. Understanding the nuances of a patient's response as well as monitoring side effects and recovery times is critical in improving our ability to treat COVID-19 effectively, especially with evolving variants and patient profiles.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning into this episode of the Remdesivir Files, the COVID-19 Chronicle. Stay tuned. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious.